Hello, and welcome to the Three-Sided Dice podcast. I'm your host for today, Nick. We're joined by our two not guests. They're also your hosts. Jarrod, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jarrod. I'm waving.
Tom, please introduce yourself.
I'm Tom. I'm not waving. That way you could tell us apart.
That's the key. Today, it's episode 2, and we're going to be talking about DMing versus playing as the main thing. But we'll probably touch on some other subjects too, because, well, we get distracted. It's kind of the name of the game.
Oh yeah, not a whole lot of focus here.
Yeah, leave if you wanted a highly produced podcast.
Yeah, we're not going to provide you that.
We're going to get one Raid Shadow Legends sponsorship, and we're dipping.
Yeah,
that's the ultimate goal for this.
As soon as we get that Raid Shadow Legends check, we know we made it, and we're out of here.
But until then, we'll provide entertainment. So, DMing versus playing, obviously, there's a lot there. There's a lot of differences, and we've all three of us collectively have been DMs for, I think, fairly long campaigns at least, and all of us have also played in at least somewhat long campaigns. So I think going into the insights and the differences and the common ground that each position has, I think will be pretty interesting. So, did one of you want to start, or did you want me to kind of kick things off?
You have that power as real host, as opposed to us who are fake hosts on this
Alpha
episode,
host.
at least. Yeah, you are the alpha host,
Yeah,
so you're supposed to throw it to someone.
Alpha host, start us off.
All right. So I'm particularly interested in, especially on this topic, the mindset going into the game that's different, right? So there's a lot of the work that goes into each session. Playing and DMing is hugely different, and I think that affects the mental going into it as well. What your focus is, how you end up having fun, how engaged you are the whole time. And so I know, like, personally, I DM a lot more than I play, like a lot more than I play. But I know that I think DMing has made me a better player for multiple reasons. Mainly, it's that I kind of have gotten a look at how much work DMing is, and I'm like, wow, I should respect that at least a little bit and try to do my best to engage with the world or be really confident with my character and play into that properly, or think about my moves outside of combat, whatever it is. So that's a big shift in how it's influenced me. And then on the player side, I've also realized that as a player, when you're given all that power to just kind of do whatever, it's like really hard not to. For me, at least, where it's like, if you can do anything, you can do anything, and that as a DM, you have to be able to sort of deal with that, be flexible, and I think that makes you better when you're willing to do that with that new perspective. Thoughts?
One thing I love personally, I'm mostly a player. So you mentioned that you think being a player made you a better DM, or did I get that reversed? Being a DM made you a better player?
Both apply, but I was thinking specifically, DMing made me a better player because I was a player first, and then I got into DMing.
One thing I saw, and I kind of had the reverse interaction because I was a player first for a very long time, and until I'd say somewhat recently, like in the last 2 years, did I really even start to DM, where I DM'd a long form campaign. Being a player, I think, made me a better DM because I was able to see it from the inverse. I knew what I liked seeing as a player. I knew what was fun for me and what, my group of adventurers liked, whether it be your table or a table from my hometown. And I was able to try to incorporate different DM styles that I experienced into what I did. So I could give a couple of examples for that. So one thing I really like about you as a DM, Nick, is you truly make your world feel like an open experience, an open world, where you could go anywhere you want, and there is no, I don't want to say there's no track, but the tracks take you wherever you want them to lead. And I find that's something very hard to emulate, but for a player, knowing I could go anywhere is one of the most rewarding feelings in the world, because it truly feels like your game and your world, and that's when the magic starts to come alive for me. And that's what I try to emulate in my games. I give my players the chance to do whatever they want over the set of a continent with one big goal in mind, but how they go about achieving that goal could take them to different areas of the continent, whether they want to fight the main villains directly or go collect the magical artifacts that the villains are after, or go build alliances or learn about the history to see if there's another secret. And these different hooks still all tie into the main storyline, but they take you to, like I said, all different parts of the world and all different kinds of quests. As a player, though, I do, even if the world feels unlimited, I almost feel I almost don't feel that same freedom as a player as I do as a DM, because my choices will inherently be not pre-decided for me, but there is definitely less freedom when the world was made around you as opposed to you making the world. If that makes sense.
Well, yeah, that's a major conceit of just DMing in general. I think when you're a DM, you have a finger in a lot of pies. Essentially, you're in charge of a lot in the sense that um, a lot of things have to be thought out by you. So when you're a player, it can feel, especially when you're going back and forth between being a DM and a player, the power that you hold, the range of your control across certain things. There's a huge disparity because suddenly you are a single character trying to influence, quote unquote, influence the world, as opposed to like the system of itself trying to influence what's going on. So that makes sense, that change in freedom having that really big effect on you.
I notice, especially with the freedom levels, and what Tom was saying about building the open world and knowing everything's there. Well, that's personally, that's how I enjoy DMing, is just kind of planting seeds and making it clear that it's a whole world out there with different stories and peoples and interactions for players to just kind of discover. I found that as a player, or rather, let me backtrack that. I think as a DM, I sometimes have a difficult time taking the massive world and such and chipping it away and chiseling into like solid structured stories, which I think is kind of always an issue with RPGs in general, where it's like you can't predict what everyone wants to do. It's not like writing a novel and you're gonna need to go with the flow beyond just the very basic story beats. But whereas a player, one thing I really enjoy is that I can come up with a sort of character arc I want to go through, and then as events unfold, well, it still changes obviously because it's a game. I can kind of know where I want to take a character, and it's much easier to apply on like a small level. You know, it's much easier to change a person than the world is. I think what that comes back down to. But I mean, they both. I think. I think what we've all kind of said so far, to sum it down, is that I mean they're both fun, right? They're both
Oh yeah.
enjoyable, but they're wildly different in the way I have fun, and the goals and the sort of standards set for each position.
Being a player feels more. I guess if I had to summarize it, being a player feels more like, I don't want to say reading a novel, but like it's like a choose your own adventure book when you're flipping through, and you have control, obviously, but you are to some degree like the world around you is not entirely in your control. You don't control fully what the situation you're put into or what the world do. Where I think part of the reason I love being a DM so much is actually, for those viewers that don't know a lot about me, which probably isn't too many, I assume it's mostly just our friends watching, but my favorite way to play games is I like to play grand strategy games like Civ 5 or Crusader Kings, and my favorite way to play them is to not pick a character and just simulate and watch how the world forms as I watch on. And being a DM is not quite that, because you do have responsibility in shaping the world, but I just like to let my players know what's out there and then see what they do. Whereas a player, I don't have that luxury to sit back and relax. I'm taking a more active part in the story, and a smaller
That's an
part in the story too, to
interesting.
some degree.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective because I think of it, the way I DM is very similar to how I write, in that I basically I set up I try to know the bones of it as much as possible. So I'm sure Tom is a player under me compared to Nick as like being a player for Nick. You can see the differences in how we DM in that Nick has sort of this extremely vast world, this whole sort of all four corners of the world sort of mapped out. Whereas and it feels, and Nick was talking about this sort of carving it down to that specific story. I'm story up. So I get that story down first, or I get that sort of theme down first, and then I build around that, and then try to facilitate around that. So
Yeah.
that's basically like the classic, like especially like screenwriter, movie writer sort of perspective, where it's just like I have a theme, I have a story I want to tell. How many ways can I facilitate that theme over and over again?
So when I started building the current campaign world, Sinun, which is the one you guys are in, I originally did it based off of a few stories I had in the first place. So I kind of started that way, and then I realized that I don't like playing. I don't like DMing the way I write stories because I think any writer goes about it the same way that you were just talking about, where you choose your theme and your sort of big plot moments, then you figure out the sort of bones in between, and that's the advice for most new DMs as well. But I realize that I personally get the enjoyment from, like you said, crafting out the world, and then just kind of. Well, I get Tom's idea of the simulator was really interesting to me because it kind of falls into that same thing where it's like, yeah, I enjoy seeing not only how the characters I developed in this world unfold and how the major events go about, but how my players' characters just come in and ruin it and interfere and like break the gears and stuff like that. I remember specifically when I was starting our current campaign in it, I gave you guys all a like a 1.5, 2 page backstory of the world so you could kind of know about it. But at the end, I think the phrase I used was the world is written in water, not stone. So and that I think is the key difference for me going back to the writing thing. Uh, when I come up with a world in D&D, I know I am not the only mind creating it.
Yeah, you are not the
Right.
sole creator.
Exactly, and I never will be, and that's what I really enjoy about RPGs because you can have other people who come in and come up with a way better idea than you, and then they kind of twist it or whatever it is. So getting that interaction with it, I think, is beautiful. It's the best part of it. But I view it so differently. Like Tom said, I think one of your earlier points, Tom, was that you view being the DM more like being in a novel, like going through it, right? I
Yeah,
think that's what you said.
I feel like I can explain that more in a little bit. It's more like I'm just sitting. I'm not necessarily doing nothing, but most of my work by the time I get to the table is done. It is up to my players to interact with what I've put forward and what's out
Yeah.
there.
So I view it as the opposite way, where if I'm trying to do it and I kind of alluded to this earlier, if I'm trying to do it like a story, like go through a story, I find I'm much stronger at that as a player. I think that's and that's one thing that Jarrod as a DM is very good at, is because they build story up. They're very good at crafting stories for players to go through, and I feel like that's always been a weak point, something that I want to improve on, or that has fallen to the back burner because I'm so busy sort of building out the world. And while I think one makes the other easier, it's always going to be tough to find that balance. But as far as like yes, I'm existing in a story right now, I find I'm much more invested as a player most of the time, unless if it's like a really compelling villain.
So,
In which case, it just goes back to I basically just made that guy a character, and I'm planning them.
I
I'm
get
playing
to,
them
yeah,
like
I
that.
get to play that.
Yeah.
one thing I'm curious about is where did you guys get experience for the worlds you've built? Because, or not
Steal
experience.
it.
Yeah, you still.
Stealing.
I don't remember.
Stealing.
I don't remember where my original concept came from, because the world that I ran my I guess the only campaign I've run, or the only campaigns I should say, I got from a summary and drawn map I made in 2002. And
Yeah.
I then spent about a year in college and then a few months afterwards just fleshing out and rebuilding upon that. So I legitimately have no idea where my world came from, except from a past memory, which I almost definitely 7-year-old Tom ripped off from somewhere else, but I can't tell what it is.
I think you always rip off. Fun. So one time I ran a Fate one shot. Fate's a phenomenal system.
I love Fate.
I ran a Fate one shot for these two and a few other people, and it was sort of space themed, and it was also water themed. And originally, the inhabitants of the planet were going to be penguins. But then it got transformed into sharks after some backstory came up. But the initial plan for that planet and spaceship crashing was from a comic I wrote with a friend in 4th grade about a spy penguin who went and did things in space. I really remember very little, but I remember that, and I was like, yeah, I can use this, and I just transformed it into a planet. Yeah, I mean, I think you get ideas from everything. I get a lot from artwork, especially seen in the fantasy world when that was like early and young. I was just looking up concept art for different video games and films and stuff, and just kind of picking out ones I liked across all genres, being like, all right, what do I like about this, and how do I make it into a fantasy world?
Yeah, like I think people really underestimate how much imagination goes into creating a lot of the time. When it's basically, so for me, Magical Cowboys,
The system you made, right?
the system I made and the setting that comes with it is basically built out of a place of frustration, where it was just I was frustrated at 2 genres and one popular story premise. I was like, the Western is so cool aesthetically, but is so especially in terms of film, is like drowned in like a lot of really messed up mentalities, like the prevalence of violence, uh like white exceptionalism, just there's a whole mess. And I was like, okay, so there's that. And on top of that, I fucking hate Harry Potter. Oh my god. So it has this like a very super fun premise where there's this secret magical world in the modern world, and it's just this whole thing, and they never talk about anything crossing at all. And the magical world is all castles and goblins and knights, and the modern world is all planes, trains, and automobiles, and they only intersect like twice, and that's it.
I love that we've now made fun of J.K. Rowling / Harry Potter in both episodes.
Yeah.
And I hope it continues.
It's going to be a running theme here, I think.
Oh boy.
But yeah, so fantasy. I was critical of fantasy. I still had to examine it and poke around with it and what I didn't exactly like about a lot of fantasy. And it felt so disconnected from normal things and normal problems. And then on top of that, I had westerns that I had problems with. And then J.K. Rowling, which it was born of a completely different idea that I basically turned into a Magical West. And so that's like 3 things essentially. So it's like a knowledge of the history of westerns, like a film genre. There's my own personal taste in fantasy, and then there's a complete dissatisfaction in a popular story. Yeah, and that's even before I bring in all the other like creative things. Like for a one shot, I brought in an antagonist that was a super villain original character I made in middle school, and made a whole thing out of that. And it's just picking and choosing, and then remixing, and then finding the fun in each sort of corner, and making it a little bit more your own.
So we've been talking about the creative process for a while. What I'd like to talk about, if you two don't mind, is the creative process of making characters and being a player. Because if you're like me, I imagine how you make a character for yourself and how you make the world of your D&D campaign and even the characters within them might be a little bit different.
So I actually try to view making characters in, if they're important, if I think the character is going to come up often or be like a major pinpoint of a story, I try to view creating them the same as I do a player, which is I sort of take an archetype most of the time, like a general guide. And I'm like, all right, how does this character fit into that? And then I decide on their goals, which is number one. Every character, regardless of if it's a player or NPC, should have a goal. That's what pushes stories forward. Their goals, their preference, like how they work toward those goals, and then their sort of relationships. So if they have allies, if they have enemies, if they have like literal relatives, family, stuff like that. And then you just kind of, if I'm a DM, then I ground them in the world, and I purposefully go out of my way to make them feel really connected to multiple places so that you can see their influence. And if I'm a player, then obviously that comes later. I think one of the key differences between creating characters for DMing and playing is that if you're creating a character as a player, you need to leave them room to grow, especially if you're starting at low level. Obviously, it's different if you're starting like a level 15 campaign in D&D. But, I mean, if you're like a scrub, you shouldn't be like a decorated war hero who's retired 3 different times and called back to action. Like, try going for more like the farm boy route, you know?
That's fair.
So this is an excellent opportunity to bring up that, in my honest opinion, as far as I'm concerned and self-critical, I make an awful player when it comes to tabletop RPGs. And I think the biggest reason for that is I get bored of characters so fast. And when you're a DM, you can sort of just like, I'm kind of sick of this character, but they're getting dragged into a new situation. I can put them on the bench if I want to. I can bring in another character to interact with them to sort of flesh out some things. I can make them address something that a character did. I can kill them. And it's just like so many different things. Whereas when you're a player and you, even when you build that room to grow, especially for me, where it's just like this arc yet unwritten, or this thing that we have to work towards, or anything like that, I feel I get so bored just stuck in one character's perspective for a long amount of time. I don't know what it is about me, but
That's interesting.
it's just a problem I keep running into, where it's just like I feel like this character is addressing the same problem the same way, or just like different problems the same way. And so as a writer, I want to be like, okay, if I take away their comfort zone, I introduce them to other characters, and I don't have this like extra character control over them to sort of push them and prod them and poke them and torture them. It's mostly just reacting to those stimuli, and I feel like that's a big failing for me, is to be flexible in that regard.
So one of my favorite, I might have brought this up last episode too. One of my favorite D&D tips for players that I heard, and I can't remember from where. I think it was a talk at PAX Unplugged. But it was a panel, and they were talking about how to make being a player more engaging. And I don't think it was the exact same situation you're talking about, but it was close enough to where it's like, how do you provide the DM with tools to make your character grow in a way that you are comfortable with? So in the same way that you were saying, like, you're right, as a player, you can't really poke and prod your character yourself. You just kind of need to throw them at things so long as it fits and react. But the concept of giving they call them knives. So if you give your DM knives, then it works really well, because you're basically the premise of that. I'm explaining this terribly. The premise of knives is that built into your backstory, or built into the relationships you make while actively playing, you just provide opportunities and specific avenues that you, as a writer in your case, would like to poke and prod that character. So maybe if your character has a rough history with their family, you tell that to the DM and you give them a specific route toward it. Like, I don't know, my sister works for the mafia in this city. It's like, all right, cool. That can come up later, and that will inevitably poke and prod your character. And then it still falls on the player to grow them in that way. So I think that specific issue of where it's like I want to grow this character, but I don't really have the tools to do so. I think that's kind of one of the, I wouldn't call it a failing, but I think it's one of the key differences between writing and playing in an RPG game.
Yeah,
Where it's like,
absolutely.
yeah, like you need to if you want that same level of if you want that same level of control or creativity coming through, which I think many players probably do. I think it's probably just worth talking to the DM, just being like, "Hey, I want you to make this character be put through the ringer in certain ways, and then provide them examples so that everyone's comfortable and happy with what's going on." But I think communication outside of game, I think, is important to getting that in game. But obviously, it doesn't fix the problem wholly.
Yeah.
I don't think
You see, the problem I consistently run into is that it's such like it's almost like a spur of the moment thing, where I'll get to a certain point and it'll like a switch will click in my head and I'll be like, I want to challenge this character now immediately, and we're in the middle of something. There's something else more important going on right now, and it's just like this whole thing. Um,
Well, maybe you
but
gotta
yeah,
play more selfish characters then.
I guess
Maybe.
that's another big problem is that I'm very unoriginal when it comes to making one character. I like to another thing that comes up in terms of DM to player sort of dynamicisms is I enjoy character interactions more than I enjoy characters. So
I
the
agree.
way characters play off of each other is often more fascinating to me than how uh, one character can exist with depth, which might be my own personal taste. But like using our using your campaign specifically, the one that we play in, Nick, as an example, Jax as a character, I think is fascinating to me. One of our player characters who is not present, and I'm going to talk about him behind his back. Is such a fascinating character because he plays so well with a bunch of different types of characters for me.
I love Jax.
Jax is amazing because in being so new to the world, so naive, yet so dedicated to doing something.
Yeah, for
He,
context, Jax is a newly created, technically a Warforged, but he's kind of just a robot in the world. And I think he's 2, and he basically escaped from an evil creator, and now he really wants to be a hero. So he's going through the world with like a baby's naivety while having the powers of a level 10 bard.
I think he got a level in fighter, but yeah.
Yeah. The point is powerful.
Yeah, just significantly powerful, and it's just like this process of like teaching this tiny little robot is like interacting with like scum of the earth criminals, and like
Baby's first war criminal.
Baby's first war criminal, and like 2 very different mother figures, and just like these very interesting dynamics that come up. And as a DM, I want to be like, okay, I can facilitate this dynamic. I can just throw another character into the mix, or I can isolate this character from everyone else. When I'm stuck with one character, it's like this one type of character dynamic that I'm trying to play out multiple times, or at least like one character. I guess I should just make interesting character dynamics with one character, which I hope to do next time I get to create a character for something. But it's just like that sort of big difference is that dynamicism where it's a conversation.
I don't think I've ever gotten bored of a character I've played. I think the closest I've ever come was there's definitely a character I felt stuck with where I just didn't. I wrote him, and the way I wrote him, he actually solved like his inner conflict kind of early, and came to a conclusion he was happy with, which is why he came adventuring. And then kind of after that, he didn't really have a reason to continue anymore, especially since he was already a kind of cowardly character that he didn't really have motivation to address it. So I worked with the DM, which in this case is actually Nick, and he's written out temporarily where he goes on his own solo adventure to give him some new motivation to keep doing what he's doing. Well, like I still want to play him, the way I wrote him didn't facilitate me to do it in an interesting way.
Yeah, and I think that's one point, especially where, like, if we were, like, let's say we were going to drop the current campaign right now and hop into a new one. I think I would try to take a slightly more hands-on approach to character creation, not in the way where I want to control what you guys are playing and make sure there's character class balance or whatever. It's not that. It's just to make sure that there's real motivations, and like I said before earlier, characters need to have goals and motivations to kind of push them forward, especially in a game like D&D or Traveler or Pathfinder, whatever. Because I mean, they're gonna face like heavy danger, and your characters are gonna need a reason to fall back on why they're
They need
willing
a
to do
good reason.
Yeah, as it turns
Yeah.
out, no one with a happy childhood and 2 supporting parents just go out to fight evil liches for fun.
Yeah, it's like, so what's driving your character? And to be honest, that's one of the most fun things to me about making characters, is coming up with reasons where it's like, all right, how do I make someone so motivated to do whatever it is? Villains and heroes alike, because
Yeah.
like, how does someone reach that point, right? I always go back to Clay Robinson, who's the one of the villains in, well, anti-heroes question mark one of
not,
the
We're not quite sure.
Questionable motivations.
I'm not even sure. He's a mob boss.
He's a cool character.
Yeah, in my campaign, he runs a gang in the biggest city in the world called the Curtain. But like, I love him so much because it's like, his motivations are so clear, and what drove him to his motivations is so clear in my head and such like that. So I think getting that, especially as a player too, and again, obviously leaving room to grow and having some dynamism, like Jarrod said, it's huge. But kind of just coming up with a basic reason where it's like, why won't this character stop? Right?
Yeah. What keeps him going?
Yeah.
We're gonna. I think I'm gonna backtrack just a little bit with this, but I don't know if I told you how my character creation process has changed from when I started to now. But I think this is a good time.
Yeah, definitely go.
When I first started playing D&D, there were a couple of key types of characters that I wanted to play in different aspects of certain characteristics, certain fighting styles, and I tailored characters I made to one of those, and I had an idea of who I wanted to play in my head. But the problem with me is I'm a pretty simple man of simple desires. So I've played those characters, and it turns out when you combine like every character I want to make, it's really like only 3 different things. It's rogue with a dark backstory, a noble mage, and my current character, man with sword. That's it. I just think swords are cool. So how I make characters now is I roll completely random. Every characteristic about that about who I make is entirely rolled on a table, and then I write the story based off of that roll and how it fits into the world. And I've actually gotten a couple of very interesting characters I don't think I would have come up with unless I did this method, because I would have definitely fallen back on the same 3 character archetypes I've been playing for years now.
I'll do that sometime. Well, not the exact method, but I'll do a similar method of just kind of like random generation, rapid iteration sort of thing for coming up with like side characters sort of things. People where it's like, I want them to be somewhat interesting in the world as a DM. I don't do it as a player, but as a DM, if I want someone to be, to be, let's say like a shopkeep, where I think you guys will likely visit them multiple times, but they probably won't come up more often than that. Characters like that, I'll tend to do that, just like you said, to keep things fresh and going. But I definitely, I think I prefer having a fine tune on characters I'm creating.
Yeah, I usually aim the character mechanically. So I think the first thing I want to settle usually is how I want the character to play, or how I want to just like play, be a part of the party, or just mechanically operate. And then I sort of work backwards from there, where it's just like, okay, why would they fight this way? Why it's like begging why for their means, essentially. And while I don't often play, so I don't really get the chance to explore a lot of these characters I make. It's still, I don't think I'll ever do random selection, only because um, I'm very picky about how I play games, as well as just I want to keep asking why.
And
Yeah.
I would recommend it honestly at least once. Like even if it's just for a one shot or like a short campaign, the the character I play in my hometown campaign is probably one of the most fun characters I've ever had playing because it's given me an opportunity to make someone I wouldn't have made in a usual setting. And on top of that, like it's given me a really good chance to really flex my creative writing because like I said, I rolled most of who he is random. Like I rolled his class on a table, his race as a table, and then I allocated the stats based off of, what makes sense for him. So he's mechanically usable. It's not like he's bad. But I've gotten a very interesting character that I haven't ever played that type of person before with that personality or background or motivation. And having him get to interact with other players in a way that I don't usually do, or the same kind of alignment, has made for probably one of the most memorable campaigns I've ever played in.
That's nice.
I
Like
will say,
like I said, I would strongly recommend it at least just once, even if it's just in a one shot or a small campaign. It is definitely worth doing full random once.
I think I've done it in a one shot once, or at least something similar where I didn't know which of the set of characters I was going to pick that was available to me. But we'll see.
I think I mean any creative exercise which sort of takes some things out of your control can always be
As
fun
always,
to experiment
yeah.
with.
Oh yeah,
Limitations are very interesting,
Yeah,
creative
and needed for
engines.
creativity.
Yeah.
this might also go back to who I am as a person. Like I said, I'm the kind of guy who wants to watch Civ 5 simulate instead of actually playing it. So I guess
Yeah, so that
I guess
that
I
plays
guess that
into your
fits in with who I
creativity.
am personally. But I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I will
don't think
say,
everyone wants to do it for every campaign because people do get attached to the characters they make and their ideas. But playing
oh yeah,
someone that isn't necessary, it's also a good exercise as a player because especially early on, I had to catch myself where it's like it, I'm playing a character that I made, but I am not playing my character. So I have to really think about how I'm going to go about situations, and I think it definitely made me a better player in terms of role playing and interacting with the party. Because after playing for a few years, everyone picks up habits, and it's
Oh
not
yeah.
just for D&D; it's for anything. And
yeah,
some of the habits I've picked up from playing similar characters is similar character and personality archetypes that now I think I've broken and become a little bit more aware of why I make the decisions I've made and like kind of interact with my character a lot more than I used to.
yeah. And I think that's a journey everyone who plays RPGs for a little while will go through to some extent. Like my first character was Damien in a Traveler campaign that Jarrod ran, and that guy. I mean, he was me. Like I
Yeah.
played it how I would react to different things, and that worked fine most of the time. But I mean, even by the I don't know, like middle-ish section of that campaign, I was starting to think where it's like, all right, how do I transform him into sort of his own character? And then the next character I played for a long while was Jack Reed, who was in the Tales of the Magical West world as well, also run by Jared. And Jack kind of ran into the same issue to the point where I just killed him. I like I purposefully jumped off of
Allowed
a
him
boat.
to die.
I
Yeah.
purposely allowed him to die because I felt like I needed like a hard reset on his character because he was kind of just a generic asshole before that, and once again, playing me. And then after he died and he came back, then he was much more focused. He was a previous family man who lost his daughter and wife to a mob attack. He had moved out west and suddenly got new powers after he realized he was powerless to stop their deaths and all that. He was much more motivated. So it ended up building a better character. Yeah. And I like I said, I think that mostly just came with experience and obviously the want. If people prefer to not focus on stuff like that, that's a totally valid way to play.
Also,
Also,
things matter table to table too.
exactly. As a quick
Yeah.
side note, I wanted to go back to what Jared said earlier that uh, Jarrod, you build characters mechanical first, and then you sort of decide the story bits around that.
Yeah.
That is super interesting to me, and I think it's cool because that's my biggest issue, I think, with D&D as a system, is that it doesn't support that well.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think I made my own system, Nick?
Yeah, where it's like there's we've played a number of RPGs now, which has been good. But one of my biggest thought processes is because we're beginning to wrap up kind of our current campaign to the point where I'd be comfortable leaving it behind within the next few months at the earliest. But beyond that, I'm thinking like, all right, so what systems do I want to next? And I'm pretty sure it's not D&D, because I think a lot of the players we have are like what you just said, where it's like it's mechanics first and then building the story around that. And I think other systems for other players who might be listening in that sort of resonate with Jarrod, I think it's important to note that despite Dungeon Dragons is a fantastic game and it's massively popular
for good reason.
Yeah, for good reason. But I think it's important to note that some other games exist that do the mechanic part better for those who want to dive into it more. Pathfinder 2e just recently came out, and it's a fantastic system for that. Jarrod's system, Tales of the Magical West, great for rooting, tooting, and shooting, and also doing that. So stuff like that. Starfinder, Traveler, for people who are interested in the space stuff, things like that. It just kind of reminded me to bring up the general point where matching your system to your players and GM's preferred game type, I think, is really important to making sure that everyone is enjoying their character to the maximum potential. Because ultimately we can sit and talk all day about the differences between DMing and playing, but the ultimate goal of both is just to have fun. And so facilitating that in the easiest way possible is kind of the point of different RPG systems.
Yeah, absolutely. There tabletop RPGs. I think it's a very chimera experience where there's a lot of different things that go into what can make it fun, and you're going to have to explore systems in order to sort of like weigh those scales on like, oh, I really like this part, so I want more of this and less of this, or I want, I hate this, so I want something that completely avoids this. Like I don't want to do math. Get this out of here. I want the story. Yeah. Stuff like that, where you're going to need I think, like we said it before, Dungeons and Dragons, 5e especially, very approachable. Highly approachable, built to be that way. But you gotta explore, and there are plenty of fantastic professionally made tabletop RPGs, independently developed RPGs. That's where a lot of like the experimental magic happens, really.
It's worth noting, even if you're sort of in the middle of a long campaign in like a professionally made system, sometimes it's worth just investigating into an indie RPG system for like a one shot and just playing with it, even if it's a system that wasn't even really intended for long-term use. Like there are some really fun ones for one shots. One of our other players, Aiden, bought a book called I can't remember the name of it. I'll look it up. But it's basically a game where you worship Cthulhu as cats. Like that's the whole system. And that's such a novel idea, and I can't imagine anyone would play like a 50+ long session of it.
Someone has, though. Someone definitely has.
Someone definitely has, and they've probably enjoyed the hell out of it.
But you could be that person if you give it a shot.
Yeah, and even if not, you can just do the one shot and be like, man, that was fun playing as a cat.
This was fun, yeah.
Yeah. There's so much to explore out there. And I think also, sort of taking it back to the original point of the episode, the DMing versus playing, DMing different systems feels so different. And I think especially if you were sort of thrust into the DMC where it's like you and a few friends wanted to play and no one volunteered to DM, I think exploring different systems to find one that suits your style is really important.
Oh yeah.
So, for instance, I'm going to talk about Fate versus D&D because those are the two systems I have the most experience DMing. And they happen to be wildly different. DMing D&D, like Dungeons and Dragons, I tend to view it as it requires a lot more setup. You might need to find maps if you're playing stuff like that. You kind of need to set up the world more. Players have less control. It's like you've placed an ocean and they're kind of going from island to island sort of stuff. Whereas Fate, you are literally just in the void, and the players are like creating islands. They're like, oh, I know this guy in this city. You're like, yeah, you do. You just kind of go from there. So the difference, I guess what I'm talking about is a scale between planning versus improv. There's going to be both in any game, any TTRPG. But the weighting will change depending on the system and your personal preference.
Yeah, and when it comes to like trying to find a system that works for you as a player and works for you as a DM, like you're, of course you can try to go out and find it, but as someone who has made their own system and even like homebrewed in the systems that they know, I think one of the best explorations of really understanding yourself as a player, as a DM, is to try to make a system yourself. Like it's not there are no requirements to making a system. It could be as loose as one page if you wanted to.
Many good one-page systems out there too.
Exactly. There's many good one-page systems, and you can basically sort of start to laser focus in on what you like. I learned so much about myself as a player and as a DM simply by trying to create a system I wanted to tell a story in. And I would recommend that to just about anyone who's interested.
I don't think I've ever had... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Nick.
No, you can go.
Okay, I don't think I've ever had, like... I don't want to say interest, but, like, I wouldn't even know where to start with making my own system. So, do you mind talking us through, like... You've talked about the motivations behind the process, but how did you even go about start making your own system? Like, where did this writing process begin to, like, all right, like, the rules, how is this game going to functionally work? How did you
Ironically, and this is it kind of goes back to our central point here, is I started making the Magical West system after I was dissatisfied with the system that I picked for the campaign originally. So we did like a season 1. We did like a season 1 of Tales of the Magical West in a system. I won't name it because I'm bad mouthing it. But it just didn't fit. I didn't like it. It was a poor choice from the beginning, frankly, because I was just running into the whole DMing thing. I had very little experience, and it wasn't a good collage of what I wanted. So Tales of the Magical West started out basically in already comparing itself to a system that did not work for what I was going for. So I had that advantage in being like assessing where I wanted to go and what I want to succeed in and what I definitely don't want to do. So if you're thinking about homebrewing or even building a system from the ground up, I won't go into further details because I feel like we could milk this for a whole episode. But I will say the very basic is you need to understand your goals. You need to know what a system or thing you create must have, what it could have, and what it absolutely shouldn't have.
I think it's also worth noting because Tom, like you mentioned, creating a full system, it's for a lot of people, the first question is going to be, where do you even start?
Yeah, it's a daunting task. I don't even think I'd be... I respect the hell out of people who make their own systems, but I don't think it's personally something I'd want to go through, just because I've seen how much work you put into making it and then fine-tuning it over the course of literal years. Like it is a long-form process, especially if it's...
I was ambitious in terms of what I wanted to execute on, but it doesn't need to be that extraneous of a process. You could, you guys have tested basically 2 tabletop games for me at this point because we did like a one-shot where I had like the bones of an idea. And just because we were playing it together, and it was like full disclosure, this is a work in progress. we were able to sort of make the fun out of it, even if the system wasn't fun in itself.
Yeah.
And I was seeing what was working for me and what wasn't working for you guys and everything like that. And I got to take notes and change based on that. But it can still be a fun experience to just try, even starting from like nothing. So looking for like places to start if you're interested, setting goals, and then putting on a big piece of paper just these goals and staring at them. You find that you basically want to build things that facilitate to the things that you would want to play and DM, which I think is the big goal here.
Yeah, and I think to build off that again, if you're still intimidated by the thought of a system, start homebrewing the system you currently play in.
Oh yeah,
I mean, you can change the rules to fit you however you want. There's no one's going to come in and tell you you're wrong because you're not. So you can, I mean, you can create new classes and subclasses. You can create magical items. You can create new races. You can create new interaction rules and all that. And then eventually, I mean, if you do it enough, you'll find that you have your own system in the first place. So starting small is always an option. And like Jarrod said, I think doing it like that can make even more sense for some people who specifically only have like a few goals to change, right? Where let's say you're sitting there, you're like, man, I really wish combat were faster in this system. Where it's like, all right, well, how does combat work now? And then how do other systems with quicker combat work? And that's going to give you, never mind the fact that you're just going through the creative process, which has its own value. You're also examining other published official rules from people who kind of at least a little bit know what they're doing.
Yeah, who at a glance know what they're doing.
Yeah, so that'll make you stronger in the first place. You know, stand on them. Like the ideas for stories earlier, steal what you can and apply it to your own systems.
It's fair. I do see the value and the fun in making it. But like I said, I homebrewed a world, not even a system, just a setting, over the course of like I think a year, and that was a hard task. It wasn't meant to turn into a D&D system, I don't think originally. I was just doing it because I wanted some creative outlet. But you could spend a lot of time creating, even like anything you want to create for a long form homebrew. It could be a big project, and it could be a fun project. So while I can't speak personally to making the systems, I always will recommend, even if it's just a side project for fun or a one shot, try homebrewing a setting, even if it's just a city. You'll have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, that definitely is its own beast to tackle, and I think they can both be equally as time consuming, depending on how much you let them be. So that just kind of goes back to the goals and what you're looking for each one. But yeah, I mean, they can both be highly fulfilling, and they'll both make you just better at TRPGs as you sort of experiment with and distinguish between the various parts, both on the DM and player side.
Yeah, at the end of the day, no matter what you're doing, you're experimenting. And then you're just going to learn something new, no matter what.
So, I think we're just about ready to wrap up, but I do have one more question that kind of relates into homebrew since we've already brought it up.
All right.
Are there any mistakes you feel that you made, Jarrod, when homebrewing your system? Because I could definitely talk about mistakes I made when homebrewing just a setting.
Anyone who answers no to this question is an asshole.
Is an absolute ass.
Yes, this was a loaded question. The answer is yes. I know it's yes. You know it's yes. Yeah. But I'll give you the answer, or the option to answer how you want. Oh my god,
is the answer. The answer is absolutely yes. Because both as the person I am and the process that involves making a system mechanically arduous process, 100%. I'm not going to downplay that, especially at the stupid scale I aimed for.
Not stupid, but ambitious.
Ambitiously stupid.
Keep it positive.
Okay.
Yeah, we love you.
there's a lot of things to juggle, and they're basically, when it comes to mechanics, you will have an idea of how they work, and you'll have an idea of what goals you get out of them. That all goes out the window when you test it and you see what other people think about certain things, or the holes in the things that you really didn't think about at all. So for me, at least, it's a trial and error process, and a lot of my creative outlets are. I I thrive in environments where I can undo and try it again and just do that line a little bit better or something like that. But it is testing, failing as fast as you can to learn and improve it.
Yeah, it's a full iteration process, and I think any creative endeavor will be. And I think TRPGs lend themselves so naturally to that because you're going to be playing and talking about it with other people. You're going to bounce ideas off of it, and hopefully if you're in a group with friends, they'll be willing to tell you when an idea sucks, and then not only will they won't stop at this sucks, they'll tell you their thoughts on improving it. And it becomes kind of this group think activity where the main goal is just to have the most fun. And that's incredible. That's a great time.
That does sound pretty solid. I mean, I guess
Alright.
I don't know if I've experienced it firsthand because I just had a world, and for the most part, when you bring a world to a table, especially once a player has already seen it for that campaign, it doesn't change much past that. It's already there, and I guess my own, we could call it a mistake or a regret, is I've definitely had better ideas after I've seen how the players have interacted or gone about the world, or how I could have
Oh yeah.
made things. There are things that I didn't think about for the world that I could have definitely made better, like an economy. Like some places have money. It sounds stupid, but it's like it's some places have money, and some places don't, and there's a reason for that. And like I just didn't really iron that out. So I tried to be cool with like the buying and selling of goods and services, but at some point it just became a lot to track, and I don't think anyone straight up hates it. But going to three places where like I don't know, healing potions are 40 gold, and then it's like, oh, there's another town that we know there's a shop, surprise, everything's like 80 gold. No one enjoys that. No one liked that decision that I made. I didn't even like it. But it's like I already did it, so it's here now.
I think I think your original point of you sort of present the world to the players and it doesn't really change. I think I actually pretty strongly disagree with that.
I
And
also disagree.
that could be because of the way I approached it. So originally when I was creating Sinun, uh I was creating it originally so I could like write fantasy in it. And I kind of just hit a wall where I was like, this is starting to feel generic and boring. And that's when I thought, hey, I can play D&D in this and use my friends and their ideas. So that's what I did, and that's kind of why it started this way. And then, I mean, obviously, it breeds your own creativity. But then, as players come in, like I said earlier, they mess with it and they change things. I mean, in our specific campaign, for instance, you guys wiped out a fairly large population of Illithid in the Underdark. That changes the dynamics of the Underdark. You know, suddenly the Duergar have way more room to expand. Suddenly there's less competition so that different creatures and things like that can start to expand out and reclaim homes and such like that. In a previous campaign I ran in the world, you guys brought back an ancient sect of vampires who were banished to an outer realm, and you just reintroduced them to the world. Like that has ramifications.
Oh yeah,
that's directly
that
related
has
to the players.
ramifications. But that's
Yeah,
that's not. I don't think that's not as much the DM making that choice. That's and maybe this is just a difference in how we perceive things. Like I told you, I'm more of the simulation kind of guy. In my opinion, that's a lot of more of the players doing than my doing. Because I put the
Well,
world there and I let them interact with it, and that was just the consequence. At the end of the day, like I put the world how it was, and how the players shape it is mostly of their own consequence. Like
well, on top of the going off that, Tom, it's not a numbers game on how different things react to other things. So, like introducing a vampire cult back into the world, while that it feels like that's on rails, where it's just sort of decided on how everyone feels about that and how the vampires feel about that or anything like that, it's all getting filtered through your lens. Like you're still going to make a choice on what makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So
I
the DM,
I try to make sense of it in my lens, but I'm trying to like not every person in every group is going to have the same opinion, so I try to think like how are they going to react. So one example in one of the campaigns I ran, both of you know Robbie. Robbie,
shout out to Robbie.
yeah, shout out to Robbie, real homie, one of my favorite players because of what he does. He executed a publicly elected president of a country. So in this time, yeah, like that is a major.
As one does.
Yeah, that was a major ramification on how the world and how the country and how people reacted. There were a group of nobles that really don't like democratically elected leaders. So there is a sect of people that if they run into Robbie, are definitely going to give him a lot of support for that. There are people who oppose the president but still liked the democratically elected process that will try to take advantage of that. There's like straight up a mob of people who very much don't like leaders just being executed in their, parliament building as he just walks out the front door continuing on with his business that are now hunting him. And
So
that
I think
has
my
ramifications
point-
of the world. The world has changed. That's a country that's now in turmoil because
Exactly.
but that's not
And
I didn't decide to kill the president. Robbie
No,
did.
you didn't. But
Yeah,
you do
but
decide how
you-
people react to it.
I decide, but I still think like there is a level that makes sense. Like everything I've said, like the nobles, the anti-democratic faction, the pro-democratic faction, like those are all things that I had decided before Robbie had murdered the president. And
Well, that's
even if I decided afterwards, because some things like I do like to add and change. Like I don't just shrug and say, well, that's that if I didn't add something in. But I at least how I do it, I feel it has to make sense. Like those are all things that I have put in the world that I think there's at least. And once again, it is my filter, but I think that makes sense. Like that's not Tom deciding it; that is Tom's creations deciding it in a way. If that makes sense to you guys.
I think this might just be rule of cool for me, but I do make those choices too, and I allow those choices to quote unquote happen, but at the same time, that doesn't. So you even admitted it to us that you're going to introduce things to the world. Like omission doesn't necessarily mean that that's empty. I purposely set up the Magical West to be sort of big, unknown, vast sort of thing where I could, like, you could turn a corner and something's there that no one expected. And it still can give the sense to players that there are things outside of their control and there are things that they have yet to discover. But as the DM, you could be like, I don't fucking know what's going on over here. I don't know what's in that cave.
And I think that's huge. I think for every system.
100%.
The unexplored is crazy.
Yeah.
The Wild West fits so well with it. Exploring ancient ruins does, magical forests, all that. It's all an avenue for DMs to introduce crap that they didn't originally intend for.
Yeah. and to that point, that situation can happen where a player makes a choice and you can have this sort of mentality of like, okay, these are the dominoes, this is where they are.
Yeah.
This is how they will fall. Everything has a repercussion. But at the same time, you can be like, what's an interesting addition I can make to this domino effect that can make it more fun and more interesting and more cool?
Yeah.
'Cause I do that all the time.
I guess
I think that's
don't
a
wanna say
very
I've never
strong
done that.
storytelling device.
Oh, yeah.
But I definitely don't do that as much as I think you.
I do it all the fucking time.
I know. I'm aware you do.
Yeah, it goes back to the different styles, I think, but I think both are super valid. And either way, I mean, the world's
I'd
never
like
going to
DM
be
for-
static. I think
I would love to be a player for you, Tom.
Yeah,
I agree, yeah.
I think this would be. I think these conversations where I definitely know your two styles, but I don't think either of you have firsthand seen me DM.
Nope.
Yeah, we have to fix that at some point.
True.
True.
On the next episode.
Maybe.
But for
Maybe.
now, I think we're just about ready to wrap up.
Yeah, I think we're spent.
Raid, Shadow Legends, contact me.
Please,
And,
any one of us.
Please reach out. We're here.
This was fun. I enjoyed talking about this. We strayed very heavily away from the topic of DMing versus playing.
100%.
As we mentioned at the beginning,
we're not here for focus.
Planning very well. We're not focused.
Oh no, we're planning. We just acknowledge that not sticking to the plan is the plan.
We hope you enjoyed. Leave comments and such if you have any questions, want to shit talk us, or anything of that sort. And we'll see you again on the next episode.
All right.